All right, let's dive right into an explainer about an 11-second, kind of grainy piece of footage that captures the ultimate clash of eras on a remote beach in the Bay of Bengal. You might be scrolling right now on a device with more computing power than the entire Apollo mission, but this footage takes us somewhere completely untouched by all of that.
Picture this, a young guy standing on a pristine white beach. He's entirely shirtless, his skin is smeared with red clay, and he's wearing this hand-drilled shell necklace. He's drawing back a massive plant fiber bowstring, one that's strong enough to pull 100 pounds, and he's aiming it directly at a journalist's buzzing camera. He doesn't smile, he doesn't wave, he just shoots.
And honestly, it's literally the perfect illustration of two worlds colliding. On one hand, you've got this sleek $2,000 tech marvel that flew thousands of miles to get there. On the other, an arrow tipped with sharpened iron, scavenged from a shipwreck by a man who has never seen a phone, a car, or the internet in his life. That technological marvel is destroyed instantly, just left in pieces on the sand. Welcome to North Sentinel Island. Think of it as a Manhattan-sized jungle fortress right in the Andaman Islands, where the Indian government enforces a super strict 3-mile exclusion zone. And we're not talking about a polite suggestion here. It's a heavily patrolled line meant to protect the world's absolute last entirely uncontacted people, a tribe that has lived there in total isolation for an astonishing 60,000 years. Section 1. Why they shoot first. The trauma of outside contact. So, to really understand why they meet every single boat or drone with lethal force, we've got to look at their history, which is quite literally written into their bones. What's absolutely fascinating about this timeline is that their hostility isn't just senseless violence. It's a learned, highly rational defense mechanism. Whether it was the 2 drunk fishermen who drifted a bit too close back in 2006, or the tragic case of the American missionary John Cho who tried to preach to them in 2018, the Sentinelese reaction is rooted in this deep, generational memory of an outside world that only ever brought them death. Let's actually rewind to 1880 to see exactly how this builds. That year, an English naval officer named Maurice Vidal Portman landed on the island and just kidnapped an elderly couple and 4 kids. He brought them back to his base, completely exposing their entirely isolated immune systems to common illnesses for the very first time. And, as you might guess, the adults quickly died from the sickness. Horrified by what he'd done, Portman panicked and returned the 4 sick children to the island, basically dropping off carriers of disease. After leaving the bodies of the adults right there on the beach, he actually recorded this genuinely haunting reaction from the tribe in his journal. They retired to the jungle weeping. And really, that is the crucial point here. They aren't shooting because they're savages. They shoot because they completely understand the threat. Their bodies only know how to fight the germs from their own specific island. They recognize that a single sneeze, just a common cold from an outsider, isn't just a minor illness. It's a literal extinction event for their entire people. Moving on to Section 2, surviving for 60,000 years, thriving without the modern world. With this ironclad border in place, you really have to wonder, how on earth do 100 people survive for 60,000 winters on a tiny island with no farming and zero electricity? Well, their daily survival is brutal, for sure. But man, it is elegant. Take the men, for example. They hunt these massive 300-pound sea turtles at night by swimming out into the dark with just a wooden harpoon. They float on their backs, wait for the turtle to surface, dive down, and then literally ride the thrashing beast through the water until it's tired enough to be dragged to shore. Incredible, right? But here's something truly astonishing. Despite thriving for tens of thousands of years, they actually never invented a way to spark a fire from scratch. No bow drills, no hand drills, nothing. So they have to rely on this incredibly fragile chain. Whenever they move camps, mothers carefully carry smoldering embers wrapped up in wet leaves. If that ember accidentally goes out, they literally have to walk over to a neighbor's hut just to borrow a live coal. And this is where their ancient wisdom really puts modern tech into perspective. Remember the devastating 2004 tsunami? It tragically killed nearly 250,000 people worldwide. Well, helicopters flew over North Sentinel afterward, totally expecting to find the tribe wiped out. Instead, they found them perfectly fine. It turns out oral traditions passed down for millennia told them that when the sea suddenly pulls back, you don't go out to look at the stranded fish, you run to high ground and you climb trees. Those ancient stories literally saved the entire tribe. All right, Section 3. The coconut exception, the anthropologist who tossed coconuts. Now, despite this intense history of isolation and fierce boundaries, there's actually one wild exception. A guy who managed to bridge that 60,000-year gap. Indian anthropologist Triloknath Pandit somehow gained their tolerance over decades in the 1970s and 80s by strictly following a very specific playbook. He threw coconuts, which, crucially, do not grow on their island, into the surf. But most importantly, he stayed in the boat. He never stepped foot on their sand, and he never once tried to touch them. He fully respected the line. Ultimately, though, the Indian government had to pull the plug on this in the 1990s. They realized that even a completely well-meaning coconut drop carried a massive risk. Think about it. If Pandit sneezed and the wind just happened to catch it, the entire tribe could be wiped out. So they completely halted the only peaceful encounters the island ever saw just to ensure the tribe's survival. Which brings us to Section 4, the price of freedom, what North Sentinel teaches us.
As we wrap up this explainer, we kind of have to turn the lens back on ourselves, right? What does this fiercely isolated island tell us about modern society? Look, every other human society on the planet traded isolation for connection. We swapped out spears for smartphones, letters for emails. We've got vaccines and airplanes, sure, but we also have massive amounts of stress and screen addiction. The Sentinelese looked at that trade, they saw snippets of the outside world, and they firmly chose to remain a fortress.
It's super natural for us to look at their total lack of electricity or modern medicine and wonder, are they actually happy living like that? It's a tough question, mainly because they probably don't even have a word for our modern complicated concept of happiness. But if you look at their metrics for success, it's just a totally different paradigm. They aren't out there chasing likes, climbing the corporate ladder, or stressing over paychecks. Their metrics for a good life are visceral. They're real. We're talking a full belly, a dry hut to sleep in, their children alive and well, and the absolute absence of outside threats. And honestly, by those metrics, they are wildly successful. They have successfully defended their home and their exact way of life for 60,000 years. That is not a failure to progress, guys. That is an absolute miracle of preservation. They are quite literally the last success story of the ancient world. So the very next time you catch yourself staring at your phone, drowning in endless notifications, passwords you can't remember, and obligations just tying you down, you really have to ask yourself a tough question. Between us and that isolated archer standing entirely alone on that beach, who is really free?